The first time I realized something was off with the HOA president, it wasn't about the fines, the rules, or the constant letters shoved into mailboxes. It was something far more personal and, honestly, far more sinister. It started as just another quiet evening in the neighborhood. The lawns were trimmed, the driveways spotless, and every house looked identical, as if they were copy-pasted straight out of a catalog. That was the illusion the HOA wanted everyone to believe. Perfection, control, silence. But behind that glossy facade, there was a man running the board who thrived on fear. And his target, this time, was me. For weeks I had been noticing subtle changes in the way neighbors behaved. A friendly smile here, an awkward glance there, then suddenly, silence when I walked by. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe I was overanalyzing. But then, one evening, I found an official-looking envelope taped to my front door. Not delivered by mail, not slipped in discreetly, taped in full view for the whole neighborhood to see. Inside was a letter that chilled me to the bone. The HOA president had written, in bold, threatening language, that I was to refrain from speaking against the board in any form, publicly or privately, or face immediate fines and escalating disciplinary measures. It wasn't about lawn violations. It wasn't about trash cans left out. It was about my voice. That was the moment it all clicked. He wasn't just enforcing rules, he was trying to silence me, and if he was willing to go this far, I could only imagine how many neighbors before me had been intimidated into submission. The fear set in quickly. What if I ignored the letter? What if I paid no attention? Would fines suddenly pile up at my door? Would my mailbox overflow with threats? Would my name be dragged into one of those whispered conversations where neighbors looked around before daring to speak? But here's the thing about fear. It only lasts until anger takes its place, and for me, that shift happened faster than I ever expected. Instead of bowing down, I started documenting everything. Every letter, every note, every so-called violation that suddenly appeared after I received that first threat. It was almost comical how quickly they came in. Trash bin left visible, weeds on the side of the driveway, improper seasonal decorations. None of it was real. None of it was enforceable. It was harassment, plain and simple. The more I collected, the angrier I became. And the angrier I became, the more determined I was to do something that nobody else in this neighborhood had dared to do. I was going to expose him. Now, exposing someone like this isn't easy. You can't just walk into a board meeting and call him out. That would only end with another round of fines, and possibly even more serious consequences. No, this had to be done carefully, in a way that the entire neighborhood, and maybe even beyond, would see for themselves exactly who this man was and how far he was willing to go to maintain his control. The idea hit me one late night as I scrolled through my phone. Facebook, the community's lifeline, the one place where neighbors shared recommendations, posted lost and found pets, and organized block parties. It was the digital heartbeat of our neighborhood, and if I posted there, everyone would see it. The risk was obvious. Posting something like this could backfire. The president could claim defamation, twist the narrative, or even double down on the fines. But at that point, fear had no grip on me anymore. So, I drafted the post. I typed every detail, every incident, every threat, and every bogus fine. I attached photos of the letters, proof of the harassment, and even time-stamped evidence showing how quickly the so-called violations appeared after that first threat. When I hit publish, I didn't just post a complaint, I lit a fire. Within hours, the post exploded. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact were now commenting, sharing, and tagging others. Stories started flooding in, other residents admitting they, too, had been silenced, threatened, or fined for things that made no sense. One neighbor admitted she'd been fined for a garden flag. Another shared how she'd been cited for parking her car an inch too far onto the street. The floodgates had opened. By morning, the post had spread far beyond our neighborhood. Friends of friends shared it. Former residents chimed in. Even people from other HOA communities joined the conversation, telling me how eerily familiar this all sounded. And then came the one thing the HOA president never wanted: attention. The more attention the post received, the more his carefully crafted image crumbled. He wasn't the respected leader anymore. He wasn't the man keeping the community perfect. He was the bully, the silencer, the one who thrived on intimidation. And now, the world knew. That morning, as I sipped my coffee and watched the comment count rise into the hundreds, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every neighbor who had been too afraid to speak up, every voice that had been silenced, every family that had paid a fine just to make the harassment stop. But as empowering as it felt, deep down, I also knew something else. The HOA president wasn't going to let this go, and when he made his next move, I had to be ready. The morning after my post went viral, the neighborhood felt different. For the first time since moving there, people waved at me as I drove by. Some even gave a discreet thumbs up, the kind that said, "We saw your post, we know what you did, and thank you for saying what we couldn't." The silence that once followed me had been replaced by quiet acknowledgement. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this was the turning point. Maybe the HOA president would finally back down. Maybe the fear was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. By the end of that week, the retaliation began. It started small, almost laughable if it hadn't been so predictable. Another envelope taped to my door, this time claiming that my mailbox was non-compliant with neighborhood standards. The same mailbox I'd had for years, the same one every other house on my street had. A coincidence? Of course not. It was the first of many attempts to claw back control. Then came the yard inspections. Neighbors told me they saw board members, or at least people acting on their behalf, walking slowly past my house, clipboards in hand, writing notes as if they were city inspectors. By the following week, I'd been cited for excessive grass length, despite the fact I had mowed just 2 days earlier. The fines stacked quickly, each letter more aggressive than the last. What was happening wasn't enforcement, it was targeted warfare. At first I thought maybe it would stop there. Maybe the president just wanted to scare me into deleting my post. But then the retaliation escalated in ways I hadn't even imagined. My access to the community's online portal, the one where residents paid dues and checked notices, was suddenly revoked. No explanation, no warning. Just locked out. When I emailed the board about it, I got no response. When I called the office, I was put on hold indefinitely. And then came the whispers. Neighbors who had commented on my post suddenly grew quiet again. Some even deleted their comments altogether. One woman told me, privately, that the president had gone door to door, warning people not to associate with me. He was telling them I was stirring up trouble, and that siding with me would put their own standing with the board at risk. That was his strategy: divide and isolate. If he couldn't silence me directly, he'd make sure I stood alone. But the one thing he hadn't counted on was that my post had already gone too far to contain. Even as some neighbors backed away, others doubled down. More stories poured in, more screenshots, more proof of a pattern that painted the president not as a leader, but as a dictator in a neatly pressed polo shirt. The situation escalated again one evening when I came home to find a bright orange violation notice plastered to my garage door. It claimed my home's paint color was unauthorized. The paint color that had been approved years before, the same one listed in the community guidelines as acceptable. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was an attempt to bury me under so much paperwork, so many fines, that I would either break or be forced to sell my home and leave. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about silencing me anymore. This was about destroying me. I realized I had two options. I could either try to fight each bogus claim one by one, or I could do something bigger, something that made it impossible for him to keep hiding behind his position. Fighting him on his own turf was a losing game. He controlled the rules, the system, even the so-called appeals process. But online, that was neutral ground, and on neutral ground, the truth had power. So, I did what he feared most. I doubled down on exposure. I created a follow-up post, but this time I didn't just tell my story. I shared the retaliation in real time. Photos of the violation notices, screenshots of the revoked portal access, even images of the orange paper plastered across my garage. I compared them side by side with the official guidelines, highlighting every inconsistency. I laid it out in a way that left no room for interpretation. This time, the reaction was even bigger. Not only did the post blow up within my own community, but it began to circulate in larger groups, statewide HOA watchdog pages, homeowner rights forums, even local news tip lines. People tagged friends, shared similar stories, and commented about how they'd gone through the exact same nightmare. That was when the cracks in the president's control became undeniable. Neighbors who had stayed silent finally came forward. One man admitted he had been fined repeatedly for having his work truck parked in his own driveway, even though no rule prohibited it. Another family shared that they had been harassed for hosting a birthday party in their backyard. Suddenly, it wasn't just me telling the story, it was a chorus of voices. And together, those voices were louder than any single threat he could issue. But with each new revelation, the retaliation grew bolder. Late at night, I noticed cars driving slowly past my house, headlights cutting across my living room. Anonymous letters showed up in my mailbox, warning me to stop before it's too late. Someone even filed a bogus complaint to the city, claiming I had unpermitted construction on my property. The pressure was mounting. It was clear the HOA president was willing to do anything to maintain his grip. And then came the breaking point. One morning, I logged onto Facebook to see that my post had been removed, not just hidden, not just flagged, completely deleted. A message popped up saying it violated community guidelines. At first, I panicked. Had he somehow convinced Facebook to take it down? Had the evidence disappeared forever? But then I remembered. Screenshots. Dozens of neighbors had saved them, other groups had reshared them, and within hours the post was alive again, reposted by others who refused to let the story die. If anything, the takedown attempt only made it spread faster. That was when I realized the fight had reached a level far beyond me or my neighborhood. This was no longer a simple conflict between one homeowner and an HOA president. This was about a system of power, intimidation, and silence. And the more I thought about it, the more one idea began to form in my mind. If the president wanted silence, then I would give him the exact opposite. Not just another post, not just a viral thread, something bigger, something public enough that even he couldn't bury it. The question wasn't if I was going to do it. The question was how. Because if I pulled this off, his entire reputation wouldn't just crack, it would collapse in front of everyone, and I knew exactly where I was going to strike next. The night I decided to strike back for good, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the orange violation notices, the smug signature at the bottom of each letter, the endless attempts to grind me down into silence. He wanted me to fold. He wanted me to quit, but instead all he had done was push me past the point of no return. I knew a simple Facebook post wasn't enough anymore. The president had already shown he was willing to retaliate at any cost, and if I let up now, he'd only take it as a victory. This needed to end in a way that left no room for doubt. So I started planning. If exposure was my greatest weapon, then I had to use it strategically. No more playing defense, no more waiting for the next bogus fine to appear on my door. I needed to show everyone, not just my neighbors, not just online strangers, but the entire local community, exactly what kind of man was running the board. The answer came when I remembered the one thing the HOA president prized more than anything else: his reputation. He loved being seen as the respectable leader, the man who kept the neighborhood perfect. He thrived on appearances, on control, on being untouchable. If I could destroy that facade in one decisive move, it would all come crashing down. And there was one tool that could make that happen: public attention. So I gathered everything I had: every letter, every violation notice, every screenshot of revoked access, every neighbor's testimony. I organized it like a case file, with evidence laid out so neatly that even a skeptic couldn't deny it. Then I took the step that turned this private battle into a public reckoning. I contacted the local news. At first, I expected hesitation. Why would a news station care about one homeowner's fight with an HOA? But the moment I explained that my viral post had already reached thousands, they realized there was something bigger here. They saw what I saw, that this wasn't just one conflict. It was a story that resonated with anyone who had ever felt powerless against an overreaching system. The reporter asked for interviews. Neighbors volunteered their stories. Screenshots and letters were shared. What had started as a single post on Facebook was now being prepared as a segment on the evening news. When the story aired, it was everything I hoped for. The segment began with a shot of our pristine, cookie-cutter neighborhood, then cut straight to the orange violation notices taped to my garage door. The reporter explained how the president had issued threats, retaliated against criticism, and silenced voices for years. They played clips of neighbors sharing their own harassment, each one sounding eerily similar to mine. And then, the final punch. The reporter mentioned that the HOA president had refused to comment. In that silence, his carefully built image collapsed. The reaction was instant. By the next morning, the story had been shared across social media, reaching far beyond our city. Comment sections filled with outrage, with people tagging friends and saying things like, "This is exactly what happened in my neighborhood." Calls for accountability spread like wildfire. And in my own community, the shift was undeniable. For the first time, people openly stood against him. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak now voiced their anger. A petition circulated demanding his resignation. Some even began showing up at board meetings en masse, their presence a physical reminder that his power was crumbling. The president tried to fight back. He sent out an official statement claiming the news story was misleading and that the board acted in the best interest of the community. But the damage was done. Nobody believed him anymore. His letters of threats had already gone viral. His silence on camera had spoken louder than any press release ever could. And then came the moment I'll never forget. At the next board meeting, the room was packed. Dozens of neighbors, some standing in the back, arms crossed, waiting. The president walked in, the same man who had once strutted with confidence, and for the first time he looked small. He avoided eye contact, shuffled papers nervously, and tried to stick to the agenda. But the crowd wasn't there for routine updates. They were there for him. One by one, neighbors stood up and voiced their grievances. Stories of fines, threats, intimidation. It poured out like a dam breaking. And with every voice, his authority withered. By the end, the calls for his resignation were so loud he could barely finish the meeting. Within a week, he stepped down. No letter, no ceremony, no grace, just a brief announcement sent through email claiming he was retiring from his role to focus on personal matters. But everyone knew the truth. He hadn't retired. He had been exposed, stripped of the very thing he had valued most: control. And all it took was one post, one spark that lit a fire no amount of threats could extinguish. For me, the aftermath was surreal. The fines disappeared, the bogus violations vanished, access to the portal was restored. But more importantly, the neighborhood felt alive again. People talked freely, without the shadow of intimidation hanging over them. Block parties returned. Conversations happened openly in driveways instead of behind closed doors. The fear was gone. But the story didn't end there. My post, the one that had started it all, continued to circulate online. It became a reference point in discussions about HOA abuse across the country. Messages poured in from strangers, thanking me for speaking up, for showing them that it was possible to fight back. Some even said they had taken their own stories public after seeing mine. The president had tried to silence me. Instead, he amplified my voice more than I ever could have on my own. And that's the part that still amazes me. When I look back, I realize the power wasn't in the fines, or the letters, or even in the board's authority. The power was in silence. That was what he depended on. That was what kept him strong for so long. The moment I refused to be silent, the moment I put his actions in the light, everything changed. It wasn't easy. It wasn't without fear. But in the end, truth doesn't need permission. It doesn't ask for approval. It just needs to be spoken, once, loudly enough for others to hear. And when it is, even the strongest facade can collapse overnight. Because sometimes, all it takes to bring down the most controlling figure in the neighborhood is the very thing they fear most. A single voice that refuses to stay quiet.